What is good, Token Confessions family? Hey, listen, I want to first of all thank you guys for subscribing, for reviewing, for supporting us, because without that, we would not be kicking off season 4 right now. So listen, we've got a lot of things planned. We've got some special guests, some of your favorites, some of our favorites. And honestly, we can't wait to get this material out to you. So make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you're sharing this with your friends and your families as we continue to journey down this road of anti-racism together. Let's dive into today's episode. What happened tonight? Zoom and Facebook typically communicate, but there's an issue happening, and I also tried it with YouTube, and so there we are. So we're having issues with connection with YouTube and Facebook. So we were like, hey, let's just throw this out there. Let's throw this out here and see what happens. Let's see who comes. And again, we're not expecting a ton of people, but we're going to just podcast, and then we're going to release this on our channel as well. So thank you guys for supporting. Thank you guys for following us. Tonight we have special guests, one of Cedric's friends and one of my new friends now, Trent. Thank you for being here tonight. We've got a lot to talk about, but before we dive in, tell the people who you are, where you're from, what you do, what you're about, all the good things.
Oh, so I'm one of, 8 people who's originally from Charlotte, but I'm one who moved away and only came back because so many new people came. So I've been a consultant. I've worked in a Fortune 500 company. I've been on the school board in Charlotte. And most importantly, I'm Cedric's friend. So,
yeah.
So what has that friendship been like? Because I don't know how long y'all have known each other, but I'm so curious to see, where did the friendship start and where has it progressed towards?
Yeah, it started with Cedric being the middle school minister for my kids. And as often goes, that means the middle school minister becomes the family minister, becomes the buddy. And, in fact, one of the ways that I really, I would say, amped up my understanding of the importance of anti-racism work was a book discussion of the new Jim Crow that Cedric invited me to be part of. And that got me amped up.
Yeah. Nice. And so I'm curious, how was that book discussion? Like, was that your on ramp into anti-racism, or did you have a couple?
Oh, froze up.
Yeah, but I know what he's asking. I'll tell you, I think I am. So when I was in
my power just went out.
When I was in elected office, I was a sort of milquetoast moderate, maybe left leaning, and tried to convince myself that we were in a post-racial world. It was all about wealth and poverty, but reality kept pulling me back. And I guess the thing about reading and discussing the new Jim Crow was, I'm 50, right? And so I remember the Reagan years and I remember the crime bill and Bill Clinton's work and so forth. And so it was basically taking all of those things that I remembered from being a teenager and putting them in a correct light.
Sorry about the disconnection. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yep.
Yeah. So obviously we talked about this before. My internet's spotty because I live in a dark hole in Charlotte. And unfortunately, even though my bathroom is on that side of the house, which is to my right, our outlet in our bathroom is connected to the same outlet and power supply in my studio, opposite ends. And so my wife used the hair dryer, which pulled in contrast to my studio setup, which knocked the power out. So
Come on, Megan. You're supposed to be on the call. We see your icon there.
She doesn't really. I'm just kidding. She's listening probably.
It's multitasking.
Yeah. So
Multitasking.
So what did I miss?
Well, Trent was just saying how, and I can relate to this because I wasn't a teenager, but I was a kid old enough to remember the Reagan years and all of the discussion in particular, because by Clinton, I was in high school around the crime bill. And it just helped open my eyes as well to what was, in a way, really going on. And the bigger picture of the context of all these things that they were doing that just added on to the incarceration system becoming what it has become. As I often tell people, like, Nixon kind of got the rhetoric around it going, but like Reagan really got it going. Bush Senior like tinkered with it, got it, a little bit better. He upgraded it, but Clinton perfected it. And, and which is fascinating because so often people want to talk about it in this binary. Well, the Republicans did this and then the Democrats did this. And it's like, Clinton figured out if I want to win, I got to be tough on crime. And he had no problem throwing black people under the bus, basically, with his policies. Yet he was often jokingly and somewhat half seriously talked about as the first black president because he could play the saxophone and seem pretty hip.
I was definitely in elementary school, and the only thing I remembered was the Dare T-shirts and like all of these random assemblies with don't do drugs, just say no, and all of this stuff. And so they were starting really early. They were coming in hard, like with that crackdown on crime and the war on black people, essentially. So, I definitely remember those days. So, but I actually want to come back to that. But before we dive into our real topic, we have to start off by acknowledging the fact that 2020 sucks.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to spin it, and I know that we're all hoping
it would involve profanity.
It really would, and it's just not been a year in favor of a lot of people and all of us, I think. But the death of Chadwick Boseman is that one it hits so different. Yeah, it hits so. I mean, we talked about Kobe being an icon, and we've talked about various people and various deaths, but this one really hit different. But before I share, I would love to hear, how did this death impact y'all? Where were you when you heard the news? Mm-hmm. How did you take it in?
Yeah, I'll defer to our guest first.
Yeah, so I heard my wife scream, "What?" from across the house. And we're big Marvel fans, and Black Panther is one of our favorite characters. And I don't know, I guess the thing that struck me about Chadwick Boseman is that everything he did, he seemed to carry such dignity and such gravity and such grace. And there's just a presence about the guy. And it wasn't like it turned on, turned off. It was just constant. And whether he was on a talk show or paparazzi catching somewhere, and I think that played out. You see that it wasn't anything but 100% authentic, because that's how he lived the last 4.5 years of his life.
Yeah. What about you, Cedric?
I was over at my friend Wes's apartment in downtown Charlotte playing NBA 2K, and Emma called, and she says, what's this about Chadwick Boseman being dead? I'm like, what? Similar response. So I immediately pick up my phone and Google it, and sure enough, it's not a hoax. It's not one of these psych things. It's legit, which then took me to, because it said, he died of colon cancer. Well, that would explain all the weight loss. Because I can remember seeing those pictures of him looking like, it reminded me of pictures of Christian Bale when he was getting himself ready for his role in The Machinist, right? Something, maybe he's losing all this weight for a role, or maybe he's unwell, but he never responded online or publicly to the speculation about what his health reasons or what was going on that he was losing so much weight. And I kind of not thought much about it since he made an appearance at the NBA All-Star weekend judging the dunk contest, which even looking back then, he was still pretty skinny, but he had a hoodie on to hide it. And come to find out, like the whole time he was doing the Black Panther, he was getting treatment.
Yeah.
So it just shocked me. It's almost like I'm already numb from everything else that's gone on this week. So it's like I just didn't even have the emotions. I was like too exhausted to be emotional about it. But I heard Tyler Burns talk about this really well today on Drop the Mic, which he's going to be on Token. Pass the mic. I keep saying drop the mic. He's going to be on Token Confessions very soon. And he said, in essence, for folks like, again, myself, my generation, we've been able to grow up and we have been able to watch both Luke Skywalker and Han Solo grow old. Not the actual characters, but we've been able to see Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford grow old, become regal, do these other roles. Like, we've been able to continue to have this relationship, so to speak, with them where we're like, okay, I'll go check that out because Han Solo's in that movie. Or, oh, did you hear that the guy that's Luke Skywalker is the voice person for this particular character on the on some animated series. So you had all that going on, and basically this generation is not going to be able to see and watch the Black Panther grow old. They're not going to have that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually tried to go to bed early that night because I've been battling my insomnia. And so I got the news the next morning, and I was like half asleep and kind of half in a daze. And I was like, this cannot be real. Did my research and was like texting friends, was like, yo, like, you see this? Is this legit? And yeah, it was actually legit. And it's really tough, and I'm sorry about my audio. My wife just said it's terrible, but that's our internet, babe. So we need to move. So, yeah, so it really hit me because for me, I see Chadwick and Michael B. Jordan as they're the heirs of the throne.
Yeah,
and
John David Washington, Denzel's son.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, they are like actually like the ones that we are looking to carry us through this next, whether it's 40, hopefully 50 years, of their lives. And so yeah, it was tough. The thing that really was eye opening was seeing all the posts of people criticizing him about his weight loss. And having no idea. And I'm not saying I hope people live with that regret, but I hope that they go back to those moments of criticizing him without knowing the details, and they
Chadwick so
proactive change. So yeah, it's a tough one, but we'll see what happens. So. But yeah, so
good stuff.
So yeah, well, sorry guys, we just had a troll because we did a public Zoom.
I told you.
We just cut one off, which is all good. I'm cool.
Should have put betting lines on like what time in the.
I'm trying to count how many.
Somebody will come on.
Yeah, I think we've had 2 so far. So So yeah, and then we had Coach Thompson, right? Like that just came out like what the news hit today. So again, there are legendary figures that are. For me, have impacted culture in a tremendous way. I remember as a kid wanting to play for Coach Thompson, and I think I posted about this. Like, my dream school was Georgetown because he coached there and because Allen Iverson went there. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yo, I want to be like that. And then just hearing from various people that they felt like he didn't just coach basketball, but he actually coached them on life. So, Ray, I'm trying to read your comment. I'm just surprised that y'all haven't gotten any MAGA trolls. Get your weight up. I'm sure they're coming, Ray.
You just jinxed us. Thanks, Ray. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I'm sure they're coming.
But hey, Ray,
we're about to dive into. So.
Ray, just remember, Jesus saves.
Oh, come on. Ray's going to have to show his video and talk to him. So, but that kind of to Ray's point, that brings us to our topic today about Washington and Lee University. And so I'm gonna let you guys take that one, and I'm gonna try to deal with some of these trolls.
Yeah. No, it's. I mean, again, I think it also just needs to be mentioned again. I mean, John Thompson is just another person, and Chadwick, that it's on their passing that we're now hearing all these other stories about them. And, I mean, go on Allen Iverson's Instagram and read his tribute. I mean, anyway, all that being said. So part of the reason why we wanted to have Trent on, that was a hard shift and transition. The reason why we wanted to have Trent on was, early in the midst of everything that's been going on, there was this conversation that started up around Confederate monuments and removing the flag and all those different things. And one of the things that actually also came up was certain institutions being named after folks and historical figures who are intrinsically tied to the Confederacy. And the rebellion that led to the Civil War. And one of the most prominent names amongst those who has had everything from institutions to high schools named after them is Robert E. Lee. And Trent is an alumnus of Washington and Lee. And so I noticed that you started posting about how there's this conversation that started happening amongst you all as alumni. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. Washington and Lee it's a small school. There's only about 2,200 students there at any one time in the undergrad and the law school. But it's a school that's had a reputation for producing leaders and successful business people and so forth. It's also had a reputation of being traditionally very conservative. And I think there's sort of been a feeling by those of us who are a little more progressive that, hey, why bother? I can't really do anything. And there was an alumna from the class of 1998 who said, this bothers me, and started a conversation. She wrote a letter and she shared it with some friends, and it kind of took off. And almost immediately, another guy from that era started a Facebook group. I happened to totally different conversation. I wasn't a part of their conversation, but I messaged somebody else. I said, hey, this is bothering me. What can I do? He said, actually, there's this brand new Facebook group. It had just started, I think, that day. And then there were conversations. Well, hey, what can we do? What can the 34 of us do? hey, wow, there's 58 of us now. And then, whoa, it took off. Mm-hmm. And so, originally our thought was, it was all about Lee. It was about, the name is something that we can go after. And I think one of the great things that's happened during our conversation, we started a private Facebook group. We started an Instagram page. We have a website. We've written letters. But we've learned so much from, especially younger alums and students that, hey, old guy, you were here 25, 30 years ago, and we're glad you're speaking up. But if you're just here to change the name so you can feel better, we're not really interested in what you have to say. And it was painful, but necessary. And it reminds me of what our mutual friend Justin Perry, who's for those who don't know, a leader in Charlotte, who he talks about white people to whom he gives consistent verbal corporal punishment. And I'm one of those people. And that's kind of what it felt like at times. Uh-huh. And there was some defensiveness, but anyway, we ended up, it's not over, but we've written a letter to the Board of Trustees, released it 2.5 weeks ago, I guess, and it's got about 700 signatures so far. And it's one we didn't put on change.org. We hosted it ourselves because we wanted to put their name, their relationship to the university. We didn't want it to be a scream fest. So that's right.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, I visited the website, and I think there's a lot of power in the fact that you guys are publicly keeping it in-house, if that makes sense. So you have situations like many of the private schools here in Charlotte who Instagram blew up with, this school, Black at this school, Black at that school. And a lot of those schools have responded to this very public critique in-house, so to speak, where anyone can go in there and interact and leave a comment. But what you all have done is you guys have made it so that just people who have been a part of and invested in that community and who can directly speak to having had an experience there are the ones that the university is hearing from, which I would imagine would make them more apt, or I would hope make them more apt to receive it. Is that the sense that you all have gotten?
I think it is. I think, there's been, there was a lot of, I'll tell you this, one of the challenges we had early on was that the group got way ahead of the organizers. And I say that so loosely. We formed a steering committee of 6 people and kind of assigned ourselves and each other lanes to run in. And, we were at first we were playing catch up, because it was clear that we had a group that ranged that was anything from, well, I think I'd like to ask them very nicely to change the name, to literal calls. What they should do is close the institution, sell the real estate, combine it with the endowment, liquidate it, and provide reparations to the citizens of Lexington, Virginia, and the surrounding area. And we thought, okay, we need to be somewhere between those, but that's a big gap. It's a big highway. And, and I think we came to a pretty good place. It's, like anything, it's originally we were focused on the one thing and that was a me thing, honestly, and a couple others who were thinking about it politically. Well, if you focus on one thing, people don't have as much to disagree with. And if you have 2 things, there's more things to disagree with. Yeah. But then we started to realize if we want to do something meaningful, then we need to think about doing the right thing, not about expedient thing, because it doesn't matter if we get, 5 signatures or 5,000. It's that what we wanted to do was come to a place where even if the university does nothing, that 5 years from now, somebody can take this up and go, you know what, those people were right.
Right. Huh. So, I mean, you talk about all the different things, and there's, if I remember correctly, like 4 specific things that in the letter you all proposed, like this needs to change. Like, you all need to be better at this. But calling them, which is not unlike what so many of us in the anti-racism movement are doing, is we're calling America to be true to who it claims to be. Yes. And in the same way, you all have basically charged Washington and Lee University to be who they've always claimed to be. So it's not just, well, change your name and continue to do what you've been doing. It's like both, like, do all these things so that then if you change your name, which was the 4th one listed,
right,
it adds up and it all makes sense. And I thought that it just for me had the appearance of being really well thought out, which I'm sure, we'll say, well, that's the kind of, people that Washington Lee University produces.
Well, I don't know. There's another group that, wants nothing to change, right? They're the kind of conservative that is, if they could return to 1500, maybe they would.
Right, get rid of the women.
Yeah, well, there's a Facebook page called Washington and Lee, the Men's College, and there are female graduates who are members.
Talk about being in the...
What do you do? But the 4 points that you mentioned are the first one is you've got a great strategic plan, and guess what? Diversity, equity, and inclusion are right at the top of that plan. And, you say you want to have a campus that's inclusive. You say you want to have a campus where everyone can participate in the full university experience, regardless of their finances. It's a great plan. Now just do those things. And I think the university says, well, we've been doing these things. And then they provide a laundry list of things they have. And our argument is you got a lot of stuff, but you don't have an approach and you don't have a program.
Right.
The second thing is, ask current students and alumni who were there. And we picked a point that we didn't think was very arbitrary. We thought it was meaningful. It was when Charlottesville happened right up the road. Anybody who was on campus at that point up to right now, you need to talk to them about their experience. And
so that's why you guys put that date of 2017 to 2020. Okay. Yeah. All right. I like that.
And you should, if you want data, there's not a lot of data because you've never asked for data. But you know what? Trends of narrative are data. When people keep saying the same things, I was raped, I was assaulted, I had, this racist thing happened, I'm a Jewish student, and people treated me this way. That's data, right?
Yeah.
The third part,
experience is not data to a lot of people.
Yeah,
and that's the unfortunate, and that's the sad part, especially in high academia, and especially with a lot of people that they just want the facts, but experiences firsthand are not in that category. But
unless it's their own, but
unless it's their own.
Yeah, right. And then it's the most important thing in the world, right?
Precisely.
So the third thing is, okay, you're the board of trustees, you're the decision makers. So you've talked about these things that you want to do. Start with yourselves. You're a board of 31 people. 21 of you are white men. The school has been, they never had a policy that they were segregated, but they weren't really integrated until 1966. So in 54 years.
That's Northern style Jim Crow.
There you go. Right. It's very polite Southern Jim Crow, a little bit, very
right. Well, the Southern Jim Crows were at least like ingenuous enough, integral enough to just come out and say it. It's the northerner ones that they won't say it, but it's functionally there.
Well, there's 2 black members of that board out of 31.
Oof.
There have been 4, including these 2 guys, right? One of them is a classmate of mine. 4 black trustees in the last 54 years. The school has admitted women to the law school since 1972 and to the undergraduate college since 1985. Admitting women in the 80s is what transformed the school, not only in terms of academic profile, but in terms of financial profile as well. As they got better and more people wanted to go there and they could charge more and so forth. Yeah. There's 7 women on the board out of 31. 2 of them are not even alumna. They're parents. So there's 6 Texans on the board, and there's 5 women who are alumni who are on the board. So we're saying, you know what? There's room for improvement. Change yourselves. Yeah. And then the last thing is the name change. And we say basically the reason for that is that your narrative about, Lee, the educator, and Lee, who wanted to move forward, it's a compilation of myths, lies, and legends. And it's a school that's most famous attribute is an honor system. It's commitment to tell the truth.
Yeah.
You can't tell the truth if your institutional history is based on lies.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what has been the criticism to this organic movement that you guys have started?
Well, so I would say there's a lot of harumphing, right? Well, Lee did this. Well, he did.
Did you say that. Trumping or
harumphing?
Yeah, well, trumping. But well, you don't understand. It's that approach, and so we've tried to listen and just to respond with facts. What we've tried to do is not to engage in emotional arguments. Just to say, these are the facts. When we say that Lee died an unrepentant white supremacist, we say that because when he was president of the university, he gave congressional testimony where he said that he thought black people did not have the same capacity as white people to learn, where he said that black people should not be allowed to vote, where he said that black people could not think about their futures because they were only capable of thinking about what was right in front of them. He basically wrote the same things in support of his former military opponent in the 1868 presidential election. So we try to respond with facts. Now, I would say there are people on who said, well, I supported you, but then you called for quotas on the board. Because we did say, we think the board should probably be about half men and half women, because the population of the university has been half men and half women for at least 35 years. We think that the makeup of the board should be representative of as many different groups as possible, but it probably should be 1/3 Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Now, if they get to 25%, we're not going to complain. But we can do better than 2 Black members and 1 member of color in a board of 31. So,
yeah. It's fascinating how quotas have become such a dirty word. And they've been a dirty word when it comes to this for decades. But what I hear you saying, and even reading the letter that you all sent myself, it wasn't about the number so much as, like, if you want to be this, then here's a goal to shoot for. And you guys even said, look, if that means increasing the number of board members, then by all means, the total number of board members, by all means, do that. But I think also by having a quota, you end up avoiding, or a number, let's not use the word quota, let's use a goal, right?
Yeah, and it's aspirational, sure.
Right, it's aspirational. by having a goal in mind, you don't just bring in one and pat yourself on the back like, we did it, right? Because that's tokenism, which is, again.
There's a podcast about that, I think.
Right. Yeah. People should check it out. If you haven't heard of it, go check it out. But yeah, so, because, I mean, heck, we both have experiences where, that's what ends up happening. It's like, oh, we should probably bring in somebody of color. Well, you know who we should bring in? And we should bring up this person. And it usually ends up being somebody who they believe won't rock the boat too much and that they can easily not have to do much work to get them to think like them because they've been assimilated really well. Who's not gonna push too hard on things. Yeah. So.
And, the university has done great things in recent years. I would say especially the last 2 or 3 years in being very intentional about recruiting students of color, particularly Black students and first generation to college students. But they've part of the problem is the president of the university has maybe oversold it to the board. He's touted 50% increases in the numbers of black students, for example, but since 2016. Well, in 2016, and you don't lean back too much, Cedric, you're going to fall out of your chair. There were 1,830 undergrad students. There were 35 Black students at Washington and Lee University. So a 50% increase.
That's better than the church we were at together.
Yeah. There are 50% increases. There's 6 people instead of 4, right?
Right. Oh, yeah. It's gosh. So I'm curious. I would assume that in particular when it came to the name change, that's not something that you always felt this way, that's maybe been a journey and a progression for you.
Sure.
So, tell us about that, maybe what possibly got you from a point of just kind of like, okay, this is my alumni, this is my school that I graduated, I have a lot of pride as being someone from Washington and Lee, to getting to this point of recognizing, to what you're just saying, sure. Like if our university wants to become who it says it wants to be, they have to recognize that this name is a huge obstacle to that.
Yeah.
No matter how good the school is, folks aren't going to want to send their kids and write a check to that school with that name on it. And looking at the deeper into the history, not just the myth, which you guys employ that word really well in the statement, not just employing the myth of Lee, but looking at the truth of Lee. So what was that journey for you like?
Yeah, so for me, and I share this freely because I think that a lot of people have had similar journeys. My father was a KA as a first generation, full scholarship kid to college. Mm-hmm. My mom was in the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And this is when they're young people, right?
Yeah. Which time out? If people, to your point, people should actually listen to some of the history, read some of the history of how the Daughters of the Confederacy and some of those groups did a lot of recruiting, in particular in churches. So a lot of times those two things were intertwined, and it wasn't always as clearly, overtly on the surface, a white supremacist, terrorist, hate group as we tend to think of those things. But continue.
Yeah. So, and somebody asked, "What's a KA?" It's Kappa Alpha fraternity, and that fraternity right now is having its own internal sscussions because they cite Robert E. Lee as the spiritual founder of the university. But UDC, my mom was in it because she was a member of the First Baptist Church. And There you go. Now, she dropped that pretty early. And I think, once my dad was out of college, he didn't really care what fraternity he was in. But I'll tell you, here's the level of cognitive dissonance that I had. when I was admitted to Washington and Lee University and was ecstatic about it, I was working for the Jesse Jackson for President campaign in 19.
Oh, that's like 88.
Yeah. And I was admitted. I remember I was waitlisted, and the head of my school, here's some white privilege for you, called the admissions director and said, "Hey, I got a great guy for you. You need a token liberal, and his name is Trent Merchant. Here he is." And then, but I believed that Lee was what everybody said he was, right? That he was that he had no choice but to fight for Virginia. Of course, he was there were 6 full U.S. Army colonels from Virginia at the time of secession. Lee's the only one that became a Confederate. You know when I learned that? 4 months ago.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, but all of those lost cause myths that I thought, hey, it gets worse, guys. I have a master's degree in American history. And now that wasn't my specialty area, but I should have known those things. But a lot of those things weren't even really written until recent years.
Right.
And so, I think there's a lot of room for other people to learn. And I think it's, one of the things that we've talked about in our group is it's a name drop, and I apologize, but when I was at Wake Forest in grad school, Maya Angelou was one of my professors. And one of her, to sort of paraphrase one of her very famous quotes is that, do as well as you can, but then once you know better, do better.
Right.
Well, now that we have this information, for me personally, I'll only talk about me. If I don't act on that information, I'm just as complicit as anyone else.
Yeah.
So I really have no choice if I'm to be true to myself.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right. Which I appreciate, and I can vouch for you, because the fascinating thing is in this moment right now with a thing like Facebook memories, I get all of these memories, in particular post Charlottesville, post Michael Brown, just post any of those big catalytic events of posts that I made that got a lot of traffic. And there's one that came up recently where we were talking about some of I think it might have been around the removal of the Confederate flag in South Carolina. So I can't remember what it was. It was a number of years back. We're talking 4+ years ago. Yeah. But it was a conversation where you entered into the dialogue, and I can't remember exactly what you said, but it was something along the lines of something that I often hear, maybe not as much today because of what you're talking about, of us learning the history that we should have learned the first go round. Yeah. It's really hard for us to hold these gentlemen to a standard that the implication is necessarily didn't exist in their time, that there wasn't these voices that spoke out against them. It's unfair for us to hold them to the same moral critique or guidelines and rules that we have today. But then, I've had a similar experience reading the history of not only like what they did, but then also who spoke up against them. It's just like, man. Mm-hmm. And even I've had that, like, why have I not known this before? And, again, to your point, which I think it's just a great illustration for any folks that are listening, like, there's no need to be ashamed that you don't know something that was withheld from you, right, that wasn't taught to you. And so, I'm going to get on a mini soapbox, but I recorded a sermon yesterday where I told people they got to chill. Like, this whole woke Olympics thing, like, look, ain't no medals. Nobody's getting medals. And stop, like, beating people up for not knowing stuff. This isn't the Matrix where we just eat a pill, we come out of the computer, somebody straps us down to a chair, plugs this thing into our head, and all of a sudden we know Kung Fu, right? Yeah. And even then, there's a lot Neo still had to learn. So, like, folks, chill that folks don't know the stuff that you only found out about last year.
Yeah.
Or yesterday.
Yeah. And I was going to ask or add is, like, some of these people didn't know because they, pertaining to the critiques. And I would say in part because the voices were silenced. You know what I'm saying? So, like, if women aren't getting into Washington and Lee until the 80s, that's perspective that has been lost for years that could have helped their perspective through the feminist movement in the 60s.
Sure.
So, right. In the 20s before that.
Yeah. And so I'm not trying to say that we all shouldn't recognize that we're on a journey, but I do think people intentionally keep people out of their circles so that they won't be exposed to the real truth about things because, like you said, they're complicit and they're cool with it. And they don't want to face that cognitive dissonance. So I've got to justify it and I got to settle that dissonance by doing something. So that's why everybody's hiring a diversity and inclusion director right now. Everybody's wanting to find that token Korean, Black, Latino, and all of these. You know what I'm saying? So
sure. I think, here's the other thing is that it can also sound that part of the danger is it can sound saint-like to say, I learned this and then I took action. Here's another part of it. Some of this was eating at me when I was 19 and 20, but I was more concerned that I didn't want to get excluded from a party or from a group. Mm-hmm. And there were people who would I remember one group in particular who, I desperately wanted to be in a fraternity that hazed me for voting for Dukakis. But and you're like, why would you do that? And you're like, why did I do any of the dumb stuff I did before 5 minutes ago, right? And I think that's part of the human experience is to keep learning, keep trying to get better. And, there's a guy who's he's actually part of our group who says, unsure that dissonance occurred till recently. Awareness is relatively new to many from WNL. And Mo makes a great point. Some of this, as we discussed, is new information. When you're a freshman, your first meeting where they introduce the honor code to you is in Lee Chapel. And you go in and there's this statue of Lee at rest in his military uniform. And until 2014, there were Confederate battle flags hanging behind him. And they told us at the time, that, Lee really started this honor code, which, come to find out, no, he didn't. Now, did he emphasize honor? Absolutely. But the whole Confederacy emphasized honor. The Cornerstone speech emphasized honor. But what that was it was particular to white, wealthy men, and it was attached at the hip to violence. So it's not the honor that we think of today. Right.
And I don't know if I was clear about this on the first go round, but you're speaking to it, and that's, I don't think it's virtue signaling to say, you know what, I learned something I didn't know, and that changes the way I'm going to approach things that I've approached in the past. Yeah. Because there are too many people that learn new information, and because for whatever reason they find it uncomfortable or inconvenient, they then begin to work really hard to justify staying in the position, in the postures that they have been stuck in for a long time. Mm-hmm. Instead of adjusting, well, don't even get me started. But yeah, I mean, so when you find out something like, oh, this, I can either choose to dig in my heels where I've always been, or engage whatever and whoever it is in a different way that has this new information that I didn't have before.
Right. It's Peter getting the message of the gospel after Jesus is gone. It's Milarepa jumping into the mouth of the demon in the cave. You're like, oh, I get it now. They didn't have, they changed, they learned. And I think that it would be wonderful if maybe, we talked at the beginning about the difficulty of 2020. What could be wonderful is if this is the year that, even though there's pain, that there's transformation that's associated with pain. I would, one of the things that drives my behavior this year and my wife's behavior this year and some others is that we hope our grandchildren will ask, what we did in 2020, kind of like I asked my parents, what were you doing in 1968? And if I say that, I sat home and I watched Netflix, and I posted a lot of stuff on Facebook and a lot of memes, like Sanchez memeing himself eating the popcorn right now. That I think that there's something to be said for participating. And there's something to be said for the first response to when, as you said, Cedric, that point of I don't know, or that's new to me. You don't necessarily have to take a stand, but maybe ask a question.
Right.
And one of the things that I learned during the marches that we had, and that are still going on now. I haven't marched since June, but Trent, you've been a leader in the community and you like to be out front. Right now, your job is, you're a big white guy. Walk on the outside of this thing, chant what you're told to chant, unless it goes against something that you believe, and then just shut your mouth. Don't complain about it. Walk, hold the signs, do the steps, do the thing, and learn and listen. Yeah. And I think there's so much of, like, again, there's so much pain around us, and there's so much change, and even the best people are a little bit afraid of change, but there's so many opportunities for transformation that we have right now. And that's what excites me. And that's one of the reasons I'm involved with this WNL thing. Is it the most important thing in the world? No. Is it something that I know something about and maybe I can help do something about, this little piece, and maybe make it a better experience for some others? Yeah, I can.
Right. But what you all are doing, and shout out to Mo as well, because I'm guessing he's, from what you said, involved with this as well. Mm-hmm. Here I am calling him by his nickname, and I just met him. Maurice, right? Like, what you all are doing, whether you realize it or not, it takes courage. Yep. And the small act of courage that you all are taking gives other people courage. Yep. Which, I'm starting to give away pieces of my sermon that I just preached that was recorded for Labor Day weekend, because we're all still entitled to some nice things, and so no one wants to be at church on Labor Day weekend preaching a message while everybody else is trying to have some form of Labor Day weekend. But I gave the quote from The Hobbit, Unexpected Journey, when Galadriel asks Gandalf why the Hobbit. And he says that Saruman believes that only great power can hold evil at bay. But I find that it's the everyday deeds done by everyday folks that holds evil at bay. Why Bilbo Baggins? Because I am afraid and he gives me courage. And so for me, as someone who has been sticking my neck out for racial injustice pretty much since 2013, and slowly but surely building my voice and becoming louder and louder, I get courage from what you guys are doing. Because there's still people who want to say, oh, Cedric, you just stir it up on Facebook. And what are you really accomplishing by talking about this stuff on Facebook and this, that, and the other? And, you know, I get I get a little sense of pride that, like, you came to my house for a book study on the new Jim Crow, and now you're doing this. Like, I shouldn't necessarily take credit for it, but you know what? I'm going to get a little pride on that one. Right? Yeah. But again, it gives me courage, and that's my point. It's like what you all are doing is affirming to what I'm doing and what even some of the people who are on this call, from Ray to Damon to Jen to Sarah to Heather to Megan, like all those little things gives me courage, and it also gives me hope. Now I'm about to go into a real sermon, but I'm going to make it snappy. Like, I've been camping out a little bit in Romans 8, where it talks about, it relates this whole idea of the life, death, resurrection process that we're all continually a part of, and a part of a greater new creation, to childbirth, and how there's pain in that before something new is born, something new and beautiful and good. So in the midst of, like, this year has had so many shitty things to it, right, that are painful and hurt, right? It's a reminder that there's something better on the other side of this pain.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's the, like I said, I worked for Jesse Jackson in 1988. And I remember the big deal, we won Mecklenburg County, and it's there. I got to find this picture for you guys. It's this picture of me, and I've got the Black Power salute. It was on the front of the Observer. And I really thought, wow, now things are going to get better. And now I'm looking at, you know, my kids don't have the patience that I've had for the last few years, and this generation, Gen Z, they're done with this. You know, already. They're done, and we've got to be done with it too, and say, finally, let's address this. And if it's painful and if it rips some things apart, that's not what I want to have happen. But if that's necessary, if that's the work that we have to do personally, internally, and as a society, then maybe some of those things should be ripped apart.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think people understand that you can't have unity and reconciliation without disruption. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of people that I know, when it comes to this conversation, and I'd love for you to speak how you became so courageous in this work, because we have a lot of friends that are wanting to be that, but they're so fearful of conflict. So whether it's having a apolitical posture, or having this both sides mentality, or just punting this off on the gospel, the centrality of the gospel, and all of these things. And I just don't believe that that's where we should land. Mm-hmm. I do believe there are things that are explicitly wrong that you cannot just say, well, let's just agree to disagree.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I'm any great lesson in courage. I mean, for me, I've been one who, you know, I've raised my hand at different points. I was in public office for a while, and during the recession, and a lot of difficult things, and being exposed to a lot, learning a lot, making some good decisions, some not so great decisions. But I think what it requires is, for me, again, I'll speak for me, is knowing that I don't have to be perfect, that I don't have to have all the answers, but that if I'm willing to put myself out there, that might give somebody else courage to put themselves out there. And that might give somebody else courage to put themselves out there. And then we might actually be able to start having a conversation.
Right.
And we might be able to start getting a little bit of momentum. Part of it too is that, I'm 50, and I remember when I was 46, I had a conversation with a buddy of mine, and I said, I've realized that I'm past halftime in my life, and my time is more valuable than needing to please people or impress people or make money. And his response was to laugh at me, and he said, "You passed halftime a long time ago." Yeah, which well, yeah, you're right. I should have gotten here sooner, but we're here for a purpose.
Yeah.
And I don't think that purpose is to acquire things, and I don't think that purpose is to acquire money. I think our purpose, if we're truly in the image of God, whatever your higher power or conception of the Almighty is, then we're here to serve each other. And if we approach it from a service posture, sometimes that service might be leadership. Sometimes it might be organizing behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But there's a place for everybody if they approach it from a position of service and not from a position of needing personal gratification or approval.
Yeah, bro. I've been on this Dr. Cornel West kick. So I've been just blowing through his lectures, and that's exactly what he's saying. And I think that's his posture with people on the fringes and people in the margins, right? And how we have to be proximate and how we have to look out for them, because this is more about humanity versus the accumulation of wealth and materialism. So, that was really good. Really good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, this conversation is always really encouragement, because I think a lot of people in my circle, I'll speak from my context, don't really find our podcast hopeful. It's like that gospel, right? Like you can't have we can't just have the bad news. We need the good news, right?
Yeah.
And so I definitely, like Cedric said, just me hearing your journey and hearing how you're thinking and how you're processing, like this is why we do this, right? Like the fact that you came to a book club, you've built relational equity with Cedric, like that's what it takes. And now who knows what's going to happen in the next 10 years of your life as you're raising a family and impacting your community. And so I hope that's where we find our hope, in stories like yourself, in story like, Jen, Heather, Mo, Ray, all of us. Like, I hope that we can hear more stories of this and be a part of, as a platform highlighting those. So
yeah,
it's kind of weird talking because I'm getting my audio from my phone, but I'm talking in my microphone. So it's like a delay, and I'm like trying to catch up with my thoughts.
But
international call with yourself.
So
I can see where some people would give the criticism that we haven't been very hopeful. There's a reason, right? Because stuff has been pretty crappy the last number of months.
Yep.
And if you're coming to Token Confessions for hope, not that I want to burst your bubble, but we have gone on a trajectory where we are going to deal with what's happening right now in the moment.
Yeah.
And most of the moments that we've had recently are really depressing.
Yep.
And they're not very hopeful.
Hope and hard pills.
Hope and hard pills. Andre Henry already got that one.
Hope is not happiness either.
Yeah.
For me, where I've been is I've been living in a place of anger, and I know my own personality profile, and I'm really comfortable with conflict. And I've even told some people, hey, you know what? These people won't leave you alone. Put it on me. For some weird reason, maybe part of my role is, hey, let's go pick a fight. and that's what it takes.
It's that Washington and Lee and Wake Forest.
I don't know.
The Enneagram might have something to say about that, but let's not go down that hole.
Yeah, no, but it's needed because, again, like, people want to have these conversations and engage in this work without the dissonance and the conflict. Especially conflict with self. Like, again, I'm having my mind blown because I'm revisiting a lot of philosophy and these theories that we believe and how we're influenced. And I'm finding that people love to be right and people don't love for people to critique their ideas.
Right.
And I think that's the beautiful part of all of us growing. And I think it's essential for development and growth. But hope for me, in the terms of happiness, that's privilege. And these people I know that are saying this are people coming from privilege where hope is equated. Sorry, it just delayed again.
Well,
but it is this like place of I can have hope, which is happiness and conflict averse, but I don't necessarily want to empathize and walk in your shoes and find the hope in the margins of missed oppression.
I'm gonna slightly disagree with you because I know plenty of folks without privilege who have been sold a religion of hope.
That's why I said my context.
Right.
Yeah, because I'm not.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
But the people that are coming to me about this hope sentiment are the very ones that are resisting conflict, resisting the hardship. Yeah. So that's
sustained. Yeah. I mean,
explain your point, anyways.
Well, I know a lot of people who have been evangelized into a faith that is absent of being prophetically honest. It has no space for prophetic honesty that talks about how bad things were or are or possibly could be if we continue to fail to be honest about what is happening and what is, no pun intended, plaguing us. Right. Because you can't have hope without first honesty. Because hope for hope's sake isn't hope. It's childlike ignorance. In the same way that a lot of these calls to be unified, which again, shout out to Pass the Mic, because they had the guest on from formerly from the SBC who came on and like this hit me like a ton of bricks when he said it. But you got a lot of folks who want to be united around unity. Like, you can't be united around unity.
Right.
Like, you're not unified. It doesn't work if you're just unified around unity. And this isn't the exact words he used, but I'm going to use them like, unity for unity's sake isn't unity. It's a stalemate. It's a ceasefire. It's a halftime. That's all it is.
I'd go further. I think it's what I think when I hear words like, because we hear this a lot in the WNL Washington and Lee conversation, we hear about civility, right? And civility is the first weapon of the status quo, right? And so if that status quo is oppressive, then I'm not going to be civil. And I really don't care what you think about it. And where I hear that are from the same people generally in our community, right, of South Charlotte, Cedric, are the ones who are thinking about sexy, white, muscular European Jesus, right? Yep. And that's a false hope because it doesn't exist. No. And so, if the foundation is rotten, you rebuild. Right, you don't keep building. You rebuild.
Right.
So this is a side rant and moment for laughter, but to get in my head, I had this thought like I really want to take like a children's pastor's job at a mega white church, and have all the kids tell me or describe Jesus to me, and then confront their parents with it about the fact that they worship white Jesus. And it's been passed down. and they don't realize that has influenced and impacted their mentality, even though they're trying to be conflict averse but also at the same time unified and anti-racist.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and again, like, but the thing we have to realize is that we have all been colonized by white supremacist theology.
Yeah.
And so there has to be this detox and just and dealing with that and wrestling with that. But you know, people will engage or people won't, and that's the sad part.
Well, and it's one of the things that you know, until recently, I haven't really used the word trauma because I was really cognizant of, well, I don't want to pretend I'm a victim. You know, I'm a white guy who lives in South Charlotte, and I've had, you know, every opportunity afforded to me. But there is a trauma in realizing that the things that you were brought up with and were told were true as a foundation, were not only not true, but they're damaging and exclusionary and counter to what the real messages are. That is traumatic. And there is a form of, you know, again, I hesitate to use words like this, but it's almost like a form of PTSD for some white people to go, I got to confront this if I'm going to actually do anti-racist work. I got to work on me before I can be effective. And I think that's one of the reasons so many people get the defenses up is they don't want to look at themselves. It's not that they want to be racist, but they don't want to do any of the hard work themselves that will make them able to be anti-racist. This is an observation that I have among people I know.
But why? But why would they if the system and everything's working for them?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like there's this absolute level of morality and rights and the right way to do things, inerrancy, regardless of the consequences. But when I'm in danger, I want you to consider the consequences, extend mercy before you extend justice. You know, and so even for me thinking through this whole border Mexican stuff, and I'm like, man, do white Americans realize that we stole Texas and various states from Mexico?
And you know who did it? Robert E. Lee. I'm not kidding.
but again, but to your point about learning new information, I knew about Texas and the various states that were stolen, but I didn't know who it was until this week. And so for me, it's like, man, like as a believer, how do you not see the hypocrisy amidst the lies that are right in front of you? You know what I'm saying? But and I've come to the conclusion you can opt in or you can opt out. Yeah. You, Trent, you chose to opt in because you are choosing to become more like Christ. I'm joking. but in reality, but you really are, because you're dying to yourself. Christianity is about death, not just Jesus, but you as a human being, like dying to something that's greater than you. And it's motivated out of love, right? So anyways, that I don't want to preach, but
not to get too progressive theology, but
is it progressive?
Maybe another way of thinking about it is not necessarily dying to self, to like die to something greater. That's the phrase you use, right?
Yeah, but I'm not implying that.
Right. Well, but I've heard the phrase before.
Yeah.
Right. And so not saying that you subscribe to that, but could it just be that is the way of things, that we grow through this constant process of dying and being reborn? Yeah. That what Christ is calling us to is something that is continually happening in the universe, in the creation, and also happens in us as a way of growing and becoming more human.
But it's happening to you biologically as well. Your cells are constantly dying and you're growing new ones. I mean, Yeah.
So yeah, it's and not that I want to dismiss that we are invited into this divine call to enter into that, but this idea of it being, and I'm thinking out loud, so I could be totally right.
Oh, you good, bro?
This idea of it being about something greater than myself. So if I don't think the thing is greater than myself, then I don't die to it. And that is what some people are getting hung up on. They don't think that some of the things that some of us have come to recognize we need to die to is actually something greater. They don't think it's greater to recognize the humanity and the history of denying the humanity of women, people who have been assigned a lower racial caste, the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that is things that, I'll speak for myself, I've had to die to and be reborn to something else. Even if I didn't think that it was necessarily an issue for me, it's not about me in comparison to everyone else. It's about just like, am I able to continue to enter into that process that makes me more fully human by recognizing the good instead of always just being concerned and viewing the creation and the universe through the good bad binary.
Yeah. And Ray, I'm with you. I forgot that I scheduled this podcast with these fine gentlemen at the same time of the Monica and Brandy deal. But I do have it on another web browser, and I'm playing the music underneath as I listen.
That's why your internet's going out. It's because you're watching.
Exactly. We could be live on Facebook, but you just had to watch Brandy and Monica.
Oh man.
You know, the part of the thing that you guys were talking about, and you have an education that I don't have, but you know, one of the things that that always struck me about love your neighbor as yourself requires you to at least like yourself a little bit. Yeah. And if there's a self-loathing in there, you're kind of closed off. And so as is an important word in that phrase. But a lot of what we talked about today it's sort of like the language of recovery in some ways. It's about eliminating self-will and focusing instead on service to others, and that's where you find purpose, and that's where you find humanity, and that's where you find connection to a higher power is through not just sitting around thinking about things, but about taking action. Yeah. And I think that's that purpose, that's that opportunity that's available to everybody. Maybe what we need, I don't know if anybody would do it, is and maybe it exists already, and I don't know, but like a 12-step recovering, white supremacist group. But that approach is a proven approach. So.
Where's the lie, right?
Yeah.
Because the number of times that I come up across, like, the first one is like denial, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Just denial. I'm pretty sure shame enters in pretty early around step 3 or 4?
You start with admitting.
Admitting, okay.
That's what you start with, admitting, right? So
yeah.
And that's the thing, is I think so many people don't want to get to that step because then there might be judgment, right? And that's the scary thing. And and especially in what I see in this city, which is a lot of evangelicals and Protestants, and you don't have an intercession opportunity to tell you can do something to make it better or that it's going to be okay, and you carry it around. And so one choice is just to hang on to what you had. And that's some of the poison that I think we see in the community.
Right.
So how do you convince these sinners that they need a savior?
Well, for one thing is you know what we've done is try to persuade people in the case of Washington and Lee that your Christ figure, Robert E. Lee, is not, take white Jesus and put it on steroids and you have lost cause Robert E. Lee. And I'm smiling about it because it's ridiculous, but it's true.
It's true.
All of the images. I mean, he had an Episcopal church named after him where he was the rector. Now they just changed it back to Grace Episcopal. But, you've got a university that's the only university in the U.S. that's named for a Confederate. There's not a Jefferson Davis University, right? There's not a Stonewall Jackson College. And all of the imagery of this guy is of piety and pensiveness and repentance that never happened. And now, was he the worst human that ever lived? No, of course not. He was a product of his time, but he also had choices. And he made choices. Yep. And I'm not trying to hold him to standards of 150 years later, but I am going to hold him to the facts of the day.
Right.
Let's at least tell the facts. And then if people decide we know these facts now and we still choose to stay with Lee, then so be it.
Right. But what does it say that we have more high schools named after Robert E. Lee than we do Frederick Douglass or even William Lloyd Garrison?
Well, look when they were named. They were named after Brown v. Board of Education. They were named on the cusp. Many of them were named in the 60s, early 70s, just before and just after busing.
Right. So basically, public schools changed their names to Confederate generals, and Christian schools just said, we're going to go play over here.
And so, when all of these little local academies,
what are you doing?
Christian academies were starting up in the late 60s, early 70s. You did have these, a new public school named after Lee, named after Jackson. And here's the thing that we've got to deal with. That those aren't decisions that date to 1870, like Washington and Lee University's decision. These are your grandparents named that school.
Yeah.
These are family conversations. And we got to take some things out and look at them.
Yeah.
Word.
That's so good.
Word.
Man, this conversation was incredible.
It was. Hey, it's a good sign of this conversation? There's one thing that happened this week that we didn't even touch on, and I'm not going to go there.
Are you sure?
Positive. We ain't got time for it. We might have to do a special one on that. We ain't got time for it. It's 9:43 already.
All right.
Oh my goodness.
So, well, hey, friends, thank you guys who hopped on with us. Thank you guys who are listening. Thank our Patreons. We got to hang out with some of you last week, and it was awesome. And we're going to plan to do some more of those Zoom interaction calls with one another. So if you're not a Patreon, make sure you support, make sure you follow. There's content, there's information there, and we wouldn't be able to do this without your support. So appreciate you guys, and we will catch y'all soon.
Word.